My name's Nick Goldschmidt. I'm the winemaker for Goldschmidt Vineyards and Forefathers and other brands in the Goldschmidt portfolio. And today I'm going to talk about row orientation. When you plant a vineyard, there are so many things that you have to consider, because when you plant that vineyard, you're going to be talking about and looking at that vineyard for a minimum of 30 years and usually often and longer. So obviously we have vineyards that are over 100 years old these days, and we're still living with the decisions that were made that many years ago. When we plant a vineyard, not only do we want to think about the correct soil preparation, and I like to rip vineyards three ways. Most people rip in the way the rows will be planted and then opposite to that, but I also like to give it a third rip, because the more tilling that we do earlier on, the easier it is for the grapevine to grow. The other thing that we need to consider, not only plant material and everything else, that's time for another discussion, but we also need to talk about row orientation. When we think about north and south, east and west, and obviously the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And if we were to plant a vineyard in this route, in this direction here, you can imagine that west heat, that afternoon heat, is going to be pouring onto that vineyard, and we're going to get, on that cluster, we're going to get an increase in sugar faster than what we can do flavor and tannin development. And often it will get dehydration as well, and that concentration of sugar, and that wine will end up being very alcoholic and won't have enough ripe, supple tannins to go along with it. So a key factor is, all right, we don't want to have that sun blasting on that crop in August, September, October. So what we need to do is we need to orientate our rows so that we have no shadow at, say, 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the heat is the most dominant. We'll choose to plant vineyards in this direction in the northern hemisphere. So when the sun is directly overhead, we have very little shadow, and so it's not cooking the vineyard. And then as time goes on, obviously we'll get a little bit more light exposure onto those clusters later on when it's cooler and the sun is not as intense. In the southern hemisphere, believe it or not, the sun also rises in the east and sets in the west, but because the sun is coming in the other direction, it's from the north, we want to orientate our rows the other way. And so again, we're trying to protect ourselves from direct heat. The other things that we can do to enhance ripening is, on the morning side of the canopy, or on this side of the canopy, we can remove leaves, and that allows for good light penetration from the morning sun. But on the afternoon side, we would not want to do that. We want to leave our leaves on because we want to maintain some form of shade and protect those clusters. So those are all things to consider when thinking about row orientation when planting a new vineyard.